Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome our listeners, our viewers at Salam Media this morning. It is a Sunday morning, and we are coming to you live from the 55th African National Congress conference coming through. And today being day 3 of the conference, a lot still taking place. And I think the biggest question is, when is the voting going to start? Some 4,500 delegates will be starting to vote. Last night, we've seen the nominations there come through for the top 7, and clearly it is getting very, very interesting. And I'm sure as the day progresses, a lot more will be taking place, and we will be bringing you news from this conference right throughout the entire day, and at the same time provide you with analysis from the whole host of experts that have converged here at the Johannesburg Expo Center. And sitting with me this morning, familiar voice on Salam Media. We've spoken to you over and over again. Dr. David Monyae, expert on international relations at the University of Johannesburg. Dr. David, good morning, and wonderful that we are able to have this interview in person to person, face to face.
Good morning. I think it's a pleasure being here, and well done for the coverage that you have done. I think it is having a positive impact in society.
Well, it clearly is, and a conference of this nature of extreme importance, not only to South Africa, not only to the ruling party, but international. In fact, there's be a huge international interest in this conference.
Indeed, I think if we look around, just in the media section, we bump into a number of journalists coming from all over the world, from Western countries, from the East, and across the African continent. And it is also pleasing to see people from Western Sahara, Palestine interested in what's happening. That speaks to one thing and one thing alone, that South Africa, the African National Congress, is an important player in international relation, and therefore the outcome of this conference has huge implication, not just for the party and the country and the continent, but globally in terms of the kind of discussions that are at play and the outcome of those discussions that will direct the government action, whether in the United Nations or at AU or within the SADC region.
Exactly. And also at the same time, this would shape foreign policy for the African National Congress, because one of the items on the various commissions that are that is going to be under discussion is going to be international relations, and that is going to be absolutely important. And obviously, at the same time, there are going to be resolutions that will be taken in terms of the ANC's position on a number of issues. And you mentioned Palestine, Western Sahara, and those are just 2 examples.
Indeed. And ongoing the Ukraine crisis, I think we've had the noises coming in, and the president political report touched on, kind of gave us a window of what's coming, key issues. One of the interesting things for me, if you follow the ANC politics, whether in exile or now, since 1994, it has been consistent when it comes to international dimension of its policy in government, consistently pro international multilateral institutions. United Nations in particular is a prime institution of global governance, and the need to include the continent and other regions such as Latin America without representation in this important body, and the openness and call for collective action to be taken on core issues pertaining to peace and security. Well, so whether it's Ukraine or other ongoing conflicts, I think we are aware of what's happening in our own neighboring countries, Mozambique, in the Great Lake region, the DRC, and the tension in that part of the world. Ethiopia, our own political capital for the continent, conflicts as well as the negotiations that were held here in South Africa. Also outside the African continent, there has been talk in terms of the Syria, Yemen crisis, Iraq, Afghanistan, and others. And South Africa at all times takes position that is in line with the global south, progressive policy that tend to support international law, territorial integrity of countries, and advancement of human rights. I think those has been consistent issues that ANC has been advancing since 1994. And I do not see that this conference will take any other position other than advancement, continuity on those kind of positions.
Well, certainly. And also, I think one needs to take into account that although South Africa is being seen internally due to the internal politics that are playing out in the country in a bit of a negative light, we know what this Pala Pala scandal has basically done. And to a large extent, it has done a bit of damage, the economy, the whole problem with regard to ESCOM and the load shedding. So, we've got our internal problems, but that doesn't detract from how South Africa is seen by the international community, the acknowledgement, the appreciation of South Africa and the role that South Africa can play internationally, the role that South Africa can play on the continent itself. Looking at organizations like the African Union, South Africa being a member of BRICS as well. So one needs to take all of that into account when we talk about shaping South Africa's foreign policy and international relations.
I think what you have raised, I think, speaks to the question of democracy. That if there's anything that we should be proud of as a country, as a continent, in light of what's happening here with the ANC, is that South Africa has somehow attained a certain level of advancement of democracy. That regardless of the ills, internal ills within the party and in the country, questions of corruption, misgovernance, and a number of other ills, the country has reached a stage where the institutions of governance are so strong. We have the role of the media. Yourself asked a very important question yesterday to open up the media to smaller media houses, not to favor big ones. And you see ANC responding positively, allowing all media, both domestic, international media, to scrutinize the party itself as well as other issues. And therefore, I think we should celebrate that the ANC's crisis, somehow at a national level, we are able to come out of our crisis. I think what is more worrying in so many other countries and political parties is their inability to open and to have stronger pushback institutions, your judiciary, your media, and other important role players in advancements of human rights, democracy, and openness, transparency. So I think that's what is happening here. If we look and listen to kind of questions, issues that are being discussed, no one is above the law, including the president himself is being scrutinized. In other countries, people are locked and others are killed. And we don't have that. We are able to say or even to sing songs that are somehow abusing the standing of a president. So that speaks to democracy that we have.
Yes.
And we should celebrate as well.
Well, certainly. And also, I think what this conference needs to focus on as well is to see how South Africa can find a balance in its international relations. Because with globally, with what has been playing out, the Russia-Ukraine issue, we know the position of the Europe, we know what the position is of the United States of America, and then you've got China on the other side, South Africa, a member of BRICS. And South Africa is seen as an important player by all of them right across the entire world. The key issue is to find a balance in our relationship for the benefit of the country, ultimately, Dr. David.
Indeed, I think the ANC-led government has been trying to cave space for the country and for the continent. I think what is coming quite clear is that the South African government, and in its view of the AU, is that Africa wants to stand as an independent pillar in international relations. And in advocating for that is the call for reforms of the United Nations Security Council, ensure that Africa is well represented. The ongoing summit that just ended in Washington, the US Africa Summit, I think the call for Africa to have an extra seat, South Africa is a member of G20 and they want to add AU, these are welcome news. I think we need to advance for more, ensure that the continent has voting power, veto power within the United Nations Security Council, and representation in key and strategic institutions of the UN, your IMF, your World Bank, World Health Organization, and issues that affect our people, such as the COVID pandemic and the lessons that we've learned from it, as well as working with all peace-loving people in the world and being sensitive to the well-being of people in Iraq, in Syria, on our own continent, and ensure that there's no favoritism, that as much as we are concerned about Ukraine, we are saying Ukraine is not the only conflict we have. We need also to raise concern of people in Western Sahara, for people who are in Yemen. So these are important issues. A balanced friend to all and enemy to none. I think that's what we're really trying to do. But stand on principles as well. The key principles that we need to stand on.
Yes, and talking about principal stands, and we've seen in the past, even at previous conventions of the ANC, where they've adopted certain resolutions with regard and policies with regard to international relations. And the one that comes to mind, obviously, is Palestine. You mentioned Western Sahara, which is extremely important. But Palestine, in particular, was a position where the ANC had basically adopted their policy with regard to Palestine. But sometimes, implementing or adopting policies is one thing, but actions again, and it's about walking the talk. And I think to an extent, there is a bit of disappointment on the part of many activists. If one looks at Palestine, for instance, and I've spoken to Palestinian diplomats, I've spoken to activists, to academics, and they look at South Africa, they hold South Africa in very, very high regard. They appreciate that the ANC government, the ANC as a political party, has supported the Palestinian cause throughout. But again, it's actions that are going to speak louder than words, Dr. David.
Indeed, I think if you look at the implementation has been a major challenge, not only in international arena, but domestically in terms of implementation, delivery of service. We sit here in the dark using generators. ESCOM has huge issues, lack of implementation of some of the resolutions that are made in conferences. And the challenge in international relations for the ANC also speaks to the reality and the limits of what ANC government in South Africa can do. When it comes to Israeli-Palestinian, I think the overwhelming power of United States and the Israeli government, I think, has had a bearing on our own foreign policy. And you have seen the debate within the AU itself, where the bulk of African countries supported for Israel representation as an observer status in the AU Assembly. And South Africa opposed that. The two-state solution, I think South Africa has been consistently supporting that view, and the movement of the capital to Jerusalem. South Africa has been consistent opposing some of these moves. However, I think the disappointment you're talking about has to do more with ANC not recalling our ambassador in Israel. That's one. And uh, the little that one hears is that uh, the ANC government wants to be more pragmatic, ensure that it has access to all role players, including the Israeli government, and try. But it comes with all these shortcomings. But what pleases us is that the Palestinian question remains on the agenda. And South Africa cannot do it on its own. It has to mobilize and work with others, particularly on the African continent and other parts of the world, to ensure that the Palestinian question is not forgotten, is dealt in support of a two-state solution.
Yes, and also I think there's just one more issue, and I know the Palestinian Solidarity Organization. This is a very sore point with regard to visa requirements, where there are visa requirements for Palestinians, but there are no visa requirements for people out of Israel coming to South Africa. So that is, when we talk about action speaks louder than words, these are some of the sticky issues which the ANC and the government need to come to terms with.
One hopes that going forward, we might see some movements in some of these issues. We are celebrating with the movements that are being made. For instance, the president visited Kenya And from now onwards, Kenyans do not need a visa to come to South Africa, which is a major victory. I think we need to go beyond that, across the African continent, the movement of people, but beyond our own African continent, with progressive forces and progressive movements, ensure that the Cuban crisis is dealt and the role that they have played in our own liberation. And to what extent are we assisting Cuba? To what extent are we opening up for Cubans to visit this country? Similarly, the one you've raised on the Palestinian and other countries, we need to think perhaps it will be done in a gradual way. But these are some of the weaknesses in the implementation of policies, sound and progressive policies that are being adopted.
Yes, and just looking at China now, I know that is an area, of your expertise as well. And looking at our relationship with China, and considering, a lot has been playing out as far as China, the United States of America, even during the Trump era as well. There were just so many issues that were playing out, and again, without wanting to be seen as taking sides strategically, how would that actually place South Africa? And of course, we are members of BRICS as well.
Let's face it, Africa's trade with China is sitting at 260, 261 billion on an annual basis. And Africa's trade with the United States is sitting at 61 billion, roughly. And you cannot have any sensible policymaker listen to any view that we need to abandon a country that, as a continent, we have a trade of 265. Yes, we not with understanding the issue of imbalance in this trade, but it's a growing trade. We need more of this trade. All what we need to do is to avoid getting bogged down into the issues of a new Cold War. United States remains the most powerful country, number one economy, and therefore we need United States assistance on a number of areas where United States has comparative advantage. And therefore, I think the position that South Africa needs to take is to have issue-based relations. Let's be close to Americans in certain areas where they have a comparative advantage, and we know we're going to extract more from Americans. We do the same with the European Union, India, for instance, with Russia and Japan and other important. We are seeing a number of Middle East countries coming in. You have Saudi Arabia, an emerging country, coming in. And let us not forget, within BRICS itself, that we have Brazil, after Nigeria, with the largest people of African descent, then comes Ethiopia, and the third or fourth largest country with people of African descent, it's Brazil, with 107 million people of African diaspora. So we need to be very serious and think outside the box and see to what extent can we activate the African diaspora, for instance, for our own benefit. Therefore, I think in terms of opening airlines to Brazil need to be increased so that while we are focused on China, Japan, Germany, Europe, and United States, we are opening new areas such as your Brazil, your Argentina, important countries such as Mexico. We need to increase trade with these countries and ensure that culturally, people to people relationship is activated. But China remains a core. It's going to be number one country as a matter of time. Therefore, I think it will be better for South Africa to maintain good relationship with China, with the United States, and all other countries without anyone supervising this relationship, as the case now, where there's pressure for the United States that we need to choose certain people as of our friends and others as our enemies.
Yes, well, Dr. David Monyae, in fact, let's see what actually comes out of this conference. And I know you're going to keep a special eye as far as international relations is concerned, and what some of the policies, what is actually going to come out of that as well. And as much as you are, we also, but we certainly do appreciate you taking time out at this conference, coming here and joining us here at our makeshift Salam Media studio. So thank you very much for that and for your time. All the
Thank you.
best to you.
Most welcome.
Dr. David Monyae with us, kicking off our broadcast here at the Johannesburg Expo Center. We've got a lot more to come throughout the entire day. Stay with us.